China versus Taiwan. Why Biden won't defend Taiwan from growingly aggressive China? Tensions between China and Taiwan have been growing in recent months following an increase in Chinese military activity. China views Taiwan as a breakaway province with the belief it will one day rejoin the country. Despite the clear sense of separation and independence many Taiwanese feel, now calls for the US to declare the intentions to defend Taiwan have been quashed by Washington officials. China has long sought to return Taiwan to its ranks, even pressurizing international businesses to list Taiwan as part of China on website in 2018. Relations between the two countries have taken a dive with a large incursion of Chinese warplanes reported in Taiwan in January this year. At the time, analysts said the drills over Taiwan were designed to test the newly inaugurated President Joe Biden's support for Taiwan. Joseph Wu, Taiwan's foreign minister, has accused China of conducting misinformation campaigning, hybrid warfares, and recently they have increased their grey zone activities against Taiwan. Mr. Wu told Sky News, all this seems to be preparing for their final military assault against Taiwan. This is our country, this is our people, and this is our way of life. We will defend ourselves to the very end. Taiwan happens to be on the front line of China's expansion of its authoritarian order. And if Taiwan is taken by China, I think the consequences will be global. In January, the US State Department reiterated a rock-solid commitment to helping Taiwan defend itself. However, recent comments from Washington have suggested any change in policy to help Taiwan would have significant downsides. Kurt Campbell, the White House assessor, told the Financial Times any shift in policy was risky. He said on Tuesday, there are some significant downsides to strategic clarity. The best way to maintain peace and stability is to send a really consolidated message that involves diplomacy, defense innovation, and our own capabilities to the Chinese leadership so they won't contemplate some sort of ambitious, dangerous, provocative set of steps in the future. The US has previously stepped in to defend Taiwan during the Third Taiwan Strait crisis in 1995 and 1996. President Clinton ordered the presence of US Navy carrier strike groups in Taiwan to deter clashes. This came after China fired missiles towards Taiwan, which landed a few miles from the coast. The presence of the US fleet alone was enough to see China back down. However, with the Chinese military undergoing significant modernization, US forces may not be able to prevent a future attack. In April 2021, the People's Liberation Army flew 25 military aircraft to the southwestern corner of Taiwan's ADIJ. This has prompted calls for action, with experts saying the increased warplane activity is aimed at tiring Taiwan's military fleet. However, Avril Haines, director of National Intelligence, said China would class any policy changes as deeply destabilizing. She said it won't solidify Chinese perception that the US is bent on constraining China's rise, including through military force, and would probably cause Beijing to aggressively undermine US interests worldwide. If the US doesn't aid Taiwan, who could? Only 15 countries regard Taiwan as an independent state, and none of these are in Asia. In terms of protecting the country from a possible attack by China, potentially Japan, the Philippines, Australia, and South Korea could come to Taiwan's aid. These countries all have their own concern about China's increasing strength. However, despite the less than positive relationship these countries have with China, they are unlikely to step in come an invasion against Taiwan. Jack Cooper, research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, told Business Insider, except for the US, you are probably talking about Japan, by far the most active potential participant. Japan has its own territorial battles with China and also hosts around 55,000 US soldiers. And should Taiwan fall under Chinese control, Japan would have several key factors at risk. Chinese military documents said Should Taiwan fall under Chinese control, Japan's maritime lines of communication will fall completely within the striking range of China's fighters and bombers. This is due to 90% of Japanese oil and 99% of minerals resources passing through Taiwanese waters, with the document saying if 30% of these imports were stopped, Japan's economy or war making potential will be basically destroyed. Whether there have been discussions between the US and Japan in the event of Chinese takeover of Taiwan is unclear. However, the policy of strategic ambiguity in defending Taiwan is one the US is continuing with for the time being. Thank you.